It's Jeremy from Jeremy.net. I'm a comic book artist, writer, creator, self-publisher, and I share my creative process here with you online. If you'd like to get additional bonus live streams twice per month, where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around, if you'd like to be able to read my comics online in a digital archive, if you'd like to get behind the scenes work in progress, artwork shared, access to our Patreon exclusive Discord where we share artwork, give each other feedback, and just generally converse about creativity and the creative life, you can become a Patreon subscriber. For as little as $2 a month, you can get access to all that and more. There are higher tiers for additional rewards. Head on over to patreon.com/GERIMI. There are links in the description to this video. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you'd like to purchase physical comics of my comic books, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. That will forward you to my Amazon author page. You can pick up books like my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. This book is a self-contained psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. You can also pick up my most recent comic book series, Morning Star. It tells the story of Lucifer's fall from heaven as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both volumes have extensive back matter, character sketches, designs, thumbnails, page layouts, script excerpts, places where I show you how I use photo reference to put my pages together. All of that and more. You can check that out at amazon.jeremy.net. And for the books on YouTube, there are book flip-throughs for each of those, where you can actually watch me as I flip through the pages. You can see what's inside the books before buying. All right. Let's see here. Byron's in the chat. How you doing? And we also have a listener who looks like they are from Russia. Thank you for joining. Unfortunately, I'm not able to translate on the fly, but I'm welcome to have viewers from anywhere around the world. Thank you so much for joining in. So what we have today, we are continuing, as always, with Medusas, with Gorgon pieces. So this piece, I've gone back and restarted multiple times now. The line work is a little bit light because I was trying to intentionally draw lighter and thinner and give myself some room to make some corrections. One of the things that I tell myself personally when I'm creating is that if I'm drawing and I draw something 2 or 3 times and I'm not happy with it, usually one of the big things I'm missing is proper reference. And I do have small gray figures that are very similar to the little gray figures that you see in the dock to the left here. These are from zoomed out. These are from an app called, what is it called? Art Pose. It's Art Pose Pro. So there is an Art Pose that's a simple version, but Art Pose Pro allows you to put multiple figures together. You can have male and female figures. It comes with a bunch of extra accessories if you need to pose them with props, chairs, beds, tables, other accessories. So at the beginning, I was kind of a little bit frustrated with the app because I was like, all this time, I literally was sitting there trying to get them in the right pose. And I thought, when I'm using my little figures that I have in real life, I just take them, turn them, pose them, then take a quick photograph with my my phone. However, I found that when I took the time, part of it was that I was doing these at a time where I didn't have access to the figures. I didn't have the figures with me. And I really realized that reference was what I needed. So when I bought the app, and the second time I used it, I took the time and I spent 30 minutes getting the characters both into the correct pose, adjusting the lighting, saving. It allows you to save and archive the poses so that way you can reload them later, because every time you open the app, it's fresh. That's an important thing. If you're using the app and you get your characters in a pose that you like, export a photo so you've got a photo of it, but then also there's a save tray where you can save the setup, lighting and the pose, save the setup that you have. Save those setups so you don't have to start from scratch if you need it later. This I'm working from is just a photo of the pose. But yeah, honestly, I really feel like it made a difference taking the time to be patient and really get these get the anatomy. It's like there were places where the anatomy just wasn't working the way that I had drawn it. So now I've taken a little bit more time to really get these figures in a pose that I feel works much better. And that's a lot of times that's the process. I start drawing, I realize I'm not doing it right. I try to make the fixes, and then I come back and start again. So now we are at, pretty deep on the start again phase. And the other thing is I still have not bailed completely on the painted direction. But I will tell you that putting line art in here and doing this as a more linear piece feels so much more. I mean, it's an ongoing question and a debate that I've been having with a friend of mine. It just, the line work, the linear aspect, drawing it like more comic booky, cartoony, coloring booky. It feels right. So it's an ongoing debate, an ongoing battle I'm gonna have to have. Because it's not like I can't do painted work. It's just my painted pieces. For instance, I've got this hanging on my wall here. And I don't know whether the light is going to show, whether the light above my camera is going to blow it. Oh, actually, no, I realized I don't have to put it in front of the camera. I can just, where is my camera? I can just flip this and show you. So, when I paint traditionally, I'm not unhappy with it. I mean, this is a fairly small, this is a thumbnail. This was like the last thumbnail I did for that large dragon painting I did for my wife. So when I paint in acrylics, I'm actually kind of happy with the results. However, when I paint digitally, go back away from my big mug, I don't seem to be as happy with the results. That tells me two things. I should spend more time painting traditionally, and I need to figure out how to merge my traditional painting with my digital painting. Let's see here. Byron says, my man's all cheeked up. No wonder the Gorgon statue looks so... No wonder the Gorgon keeps his statue around. Look at that cake. Well, I try to keep something in there. I wanted to... what's interesting is I really do try to make... things that are going to be attractive to people who are attracted to males, and something that's going to be attractive to people that are attracted to women. I want to have, something that anyone who looks at it will say, sexy. That's kind of what I'm looking for here. So yeah, dude's showing off the cheeks. He gets his squats in. I'm trying to remember who it was that I was listening to, but somebody was telling me that when they do paintings, sometimes that whole process of just redoing the whole thing from scratch multiple times is that you get better at making the same painting each time you do it. So it doesn't really feel like it's this frustrating waste of time. I wish I could get to a better painting faster, but the act of going through and drawing, redrawing, starting over again, I try to just relax and lean into it and enjoy it. In terms of working digital versus traditional, Byron also says, yeah, I understand that feeling. The lack of internal texture and natural blending really screws with my digital painting. Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the stuff that you have to work to get in digital just comes natural. You get it for free with traditional painting. Like, I don't really worry about my line quality when I'm painting traditionally, or my brush quality. It's really just working on composition and trying to decide where do I want hard edges, soft edges, and lost edges, and just moving my edges around. But even when I do that painting digitally, there still constantly feels like it's a battle to get something that feels right. And now I'm falling back on something I learned in previous versions of doing this piece, which is when the snakes themselves don't look good, to take a step back and just draw the snake head and then work backwards. This is one of those places where normally I am very much against drawing the head first and then building the body. But with the snakes, this is one of the places where finding where the head of each snake is and properly giving that a sense of structure then allows me to work backwards from the head and build a body that has the correct sense of rhythm and volume. That's what I'm trying to get. And as I am not someone who's afraid to do the same painting more than once, I am probably going to do a painted version of this, like a traditional. In fact, that's something that I was thinking about doing this week. I just didn't bother to break out my actual traditional paints. But who knows? Maybe we'll do it next week or the week after. Break out some traditional material and do this same piece in acrylics and see how that goes. Something that I'm also thinking might be making this more difficult is just the idea that I'm not drawing. Maybe I should turn on the drawing assist grid, because I also don't necessarily feel like the heads of the snakes are laying on the surface of a bed. And sometimes having a grid helps with that. I don't usually use it because it can be a little bit distracting, but who knows? Let's see here. James chimes in. How you doing, James? He says, I have acrylics, but I think they're dried up. Yeah, I mean, they will last a long time if you don't leave them out, but eventually those suckers will dry up. I've actually been pretty happy with. I really like Liquitex. I should get them as a sponsor, except I'm not doing enough traditional media these days. But Liquitex and personally the fluid acrylics are my favorites. Although I got the basic acrylic ones. I got large bottles of them Those things seem to last for a pretty good long time. Of course, I say that with them being relatively new bottles. So, I mean, we'll see where they're at in 5 years if they're still usable. But I usually keep a good jar or a good tube of medium laying around. And if it's a little bit older, I mean, if they're dried up, they're dried up. But if they're just a couple years old and out of use, then I will add a little bit of extra medium to it when I pour it out on my palate, and that gives me a little bit more oomph. It's here, drawing guide. Yeah, I don't need anything else. I might need to turn the opacity down a little bit. Let's try that. I don't know how much that shows up for you guys, but there's just a very light grid that I have here now. And the hope is that the grid will kind of reinforce the fact that we're looking down, even though in the photo reference they're floating upwards, we're actually above them. They're laying down on a bed. So just having a little grid there to help reinforce the sense of a ground plane will hopefully help me tweak the serpents so that they feel more like they're on a ground plane. I mean, the main thing that this is doing is telling me just to trim off a little bit of the fronts and sides. I'm drawing a little bit too much, like 3/4 views, and they really need to be more like, I don't know if you guys can even see that. Move this over here. They need to be a little bit more like you're just barely seeing a little bit of front and side. So more of a top-down view is what I should be doing with these snakes. Let me just undo those. Let's see here. James says, I know you can get paints in bulk or buy them individually. He said I bought them from University Art before the San Jose location closed. He says there are a few stores in my areas that have them. I prefer buying paints in person. We have a Michael's arts and crafts store near where I live, but a lot of times, I don't know if I buy brushes by mail order. I don't usually buy paints, but I have found that Dick Blick has been a pretty good. Usually, when I do order stuff online, I order from either Dick Blick or Utrecht. I've also heard good things about Jerry's Artorama, but I've only ordered from there once or twice. I mean, I understand why there aren't that many art stores, great art stores a lot of people have local access to, because it unfortunately is very much kind of a niche activity. There aren't a lot of people who make artwork, whether professionally or as hobbyists. And that is a sad and unfortunate state of the world. But yeah, a lot of people just, making art is not a priority for them. And that is a shame, because I think it enriches people's lives. Sure as hell enriches mine. Very simple snakehead shapes. I think I'm going to taper this one a little bit more, just a little bit more. I know I'm just going back and redrawing things that you just watched me draw a few minutes ago, but it's a refinement process. Kind of like if you were dealing with precious metals and you're either panning for gold, you're trying to get them out of the dirt, or more actually if you're like dealing with like an ore, like you've got this rough iron and you're smelting it down to get to, I don't know, gold, platinum, whatever is the really valuable rare metal inside of that. That's what a lot of this process is for me, is the refinement. The thing that kind of sucks here is that the rhythm of this snake, even though the other snake is going in a loop, it's too similar to the rhythm of this snake that's right next to it. So I'm gonna have to tweak both of these to get something that has, really, I think that the snake that's higher up just needs to have more of a straight at the top and then go into the bend closer to the base. But I'm gonna have to try a few things until I find something that works, that looks good. Now let's see here. James asks, a Medusa kind of character? Well, I am sure that I'm probably going to use some form of a Medusa in a comic eventually because I'm so fascinated by drawing the creature. But it's more that visually, I just find her to be a very stunning mythological creature. It's less that I have a story about her and more that I just enjoy drawing her. For me, the narratives tend to be the narratives that I put in the standalone piece. I mean, like this piece tells a story. All of the pieces in the series tell the story of a woman who's with a lover who is a warrior, and I guess in a way their love is cursed because he's going to turn to stone because he can't not look at her. Is that a whole graphic novel's worth of story? No, it's not. Um, but it is a narrative that I find interest in repeating and exploring. And frequently, the narratives that are interesting to me in a standalone piece don't necessarily translate well to a whole graphic novel. Maybe it would translate well to a short story, and maybe that's something for me to explore, is doing tales of the Gorgon. Instead of trying to make a whole graphic novel, just do different iterations of this thing that I'm fascinated by. All right. So now I've got, let me turn on my thumbnail. So I'm just comparing this to the number of serpents that I have here and just deciding if I want to add any more. But I noticed that what I'm missing is a serpent wrapping around. So in this thumbnail, you can see that there's one kind of wrapping around his deltoid. And I'm fine with it in the thumbnail, but what I think I'm going to try, and the downside is that I've done this in previous pieces already. But what I'm interested in trying is maybe having the serpent, whoops, not erase, draw. Maybe have it come wrapping around his neck. And then down his, nah, that doesn't work either. Yeah, I feel like there needs to be a serpent that's somehow interacting with this region of his body, like the trapezoids. I'm just not sure where exactly I want to put him. Sometimes this is a lot of what art making is, just sitting, staring, making decisions, the trial and error. Making something, realizing it's not working, going back, unmaking it, making it again. Erase all of that and see if I can get something compelling out of the bodies of these two snakes. It's kind of like now I'm trying to jump back and forth between the problem of these two snake bodies up here and doing something with the snake wrapping around his body on the other side. And I need to zoom full out to kind of really see the composition. And the other thing is that I don't want whatever happens with the snake up there to just mirror what her arm is doing down here. In fact, it might even help if I go smaller. Maybe if the snake is wrapped around his armpit. Part of the reason why that snake is at the angle it's at is because in the reference, I kind of have the snake laying on a side plane. Whereas looking at the reference, if it's going to be facing even remotely upward, it's got to be on his arm, because anywhere over on this backside of the region, we're looking at a profile of a snake head, or we're looking at the snake head pointing down and away from us. And those are not necessarily deal breakers. I just need to decide if that's what I want. And I will tell you that that's a step forward for me, because for I think a lot of artists, I spend a lot of years, and to this day, I still do struggle with being able to execute what I want. But a lot of times, the hardest part is just figuring out what do I want, what looks good. My point being is that I think for beginning artists and for artists that maybe are only a few years into to making art, they end up making decisions based on what they can achieve. Like they're like, well, this is all I can draw, so this is what I'm drawing. And the fact that I can conceive of different options, and some options are more challenging than others. I mean, this piece is challenging enough that I've redrawn it 3 times and gotten, multiple, well, not multiple versions of reference, but I did use figures early on. And I also, somewhere in here, I've got a photo of my little flayed figures, my écorché. I'm not sure how you properly say it. It's a French word, but it's a flayed figure. So it's like half a muscled figure and then half with the skin flesh removed, so you can see the anatomy underneath. And I looked at both of those in the process of trying to figure this piece out. Trying to figure out the anatomy mainly for the guy's back muscle. Oh, and that's another thing about Art Pose Pro. Not only can you switch between male and female figures, but you can switch between muscled or flayed figures. So, like I said, a flayed figure is just as the surface of skin removes, you can see all of the muscle fibers and more of the anatomy underneath. I think the one thing, and it's not a criticism per se, but if I had a wish list of one more thing to add, it would be to also have a skeletal version you could see. And yeah, if you've got, most people are using these poses because they don't want to sit there and draw the whole skeleton. But for me, working out what the skeleton is doing is kind of it's part of my problem solving process. When I'm really having difficulty with anatomy, I will go and just draw those underlying the bones, the structure, and use that to try and walk/talk myself through a piece that's not working well. And what's funny is they're not part of the composition, but the little serpents that I drew over on the right-hand side are actually kind of appealing to me. So they may get worked into the piece. Hmm. So what if I have a serpent head laying at kind of an angle just below the deltoid? These snakes have huge heads, by the way. I'm looking at this now in comparison to the human figures. I'm like, these snake heads are giant. It's like they're all boa constrictors. It's kind of nuts. But it's also fantasy, so I pick and choose my areas where I decide that I want to try and be realistic. That's one of the areas where I'm like, they read better if they're big. So I'm not sure how well this is going to fit, but what I'm going to try and do is I've got this snake head turning somewhat inward towards the couple's faces. But instead of just having him wrap up and around the shoulder, I'm going to try and have him go down the back and then back up. I'm going to try and kind of let it loop around his back muscles a little bit. We'll see how that goes. The direct route might end up being the best option. Hmm. Yeah, it's just trying to find the box shape that I feel like it's just right for the snake's head. And I was trying to draw it angled a little bit more so that it was heading downward. But I realized in looking at the reference to the right, the arm itself is on a slightly outward trajectory. So the snake really needs to follow that as well. A lot of times, catching mistakes like that is almost like the drawing itself is just a big logic puzzle. I did enjoy doing crossword puzzles back when I was in college. I had a girlfriend who used to do them, and then I just started joining in and doing them with her. And eventually, I got into the habit of it. So in a lot of ways, drawing these pieces, it's a puzzle of it's a logic puzzle of form and light. Once you establish the lighting, you have to figure out how the lighting is reflected on the form in terms of like shadow and light and midtones. And then the puzzle is as you add more elements, keeping that lighting consistent across the whole of all of the forms. With the exception of areas where you choose to actively cheat it because you're like, this doesn't follow the light logic, but it looks so much cooler if I draw it this way. And you might ask yourself, well, how do I know when to follow the light logic and when to cheat? It's really simple. If it makes the piece look better, cheat. If it makes the piece look worse, follow the light logic. I think that's one of the biggest things that I struggled with when I first started taking figure drawing classes. And some days I still struggle with it. Is that idea of knowing when something is good or bad, like just your own general aesthetic tastes. You can look at other artists' work and decide is this good or this is bad or is this bad. But when you look at your own work, we're so close to it, and we internalize the struggle. So if a piece is not coming out well, if we're really struggling with it, and we have a sense of resolve afterwards, like I'm like, I defeated that dragon, then we may say, oh, because I have a sense of accomplishment, this must be good. I must have done well in it. And if we get to the end of the struggle and we just feel like we just sort of petered out, like we just took it as far as we could, like, I didn't quite solve it. Then that may influence our sensation of, well, this piece just isn't a good piece because we didn't reign victoriously over it. And while those feelings can be a good barometer for whether we need to go back and do more to fix a piece, they are not absolutes. Sometimes you can slave over a piece and just not and feel like it did not come together, And someone else will look at it and be like, you did all of these things. This is an amazing piece. It's a great piece. What are you bitching about? And by the same token, you may think that something is awesome, and someone will come and say, yeah, what about this? And what about that? This is a little funky. And that, you know what, I would just completely redraw that part. And that's usually when you want to go to your friend and just stab them in the eye with a pencil. Because you killed yourself on that piece. And you're like, don't you know what I went through? Yeah, but my point in that rambling diatribe is simply that I use that sensation of, oh, this doesn't quite feel right as a guidepost, but I acknowledge that there will be times when just because I'm not satisfied with something doesn't mean it's not working. I think that's the what I'm trying to get at here is the skill that we need to develop is the skill to assess whether a piece is or is not working. And it's a skill that I feel like I've gotten better at. I don't think I've mastered it completely. And I'm putting cross contours on the serpent on the back here to indicate the sense that we're going from kind of looking at a top view, to now looking at a foreshortened view. And that'll be reflected in the scales. But I'm putting it here in the sketch to really try and drive home the fact that we were looking at the snake in profile, and now we're looking at it in foreshortened view, because I'm trying to keep in mind how this creature is going to be wrapping around the body of this warrior. And by the same token, I have to get an angle just right so it doesn't make a I don't want a tangent right here where it crosses over, but I want to have the snake kind of merging up as if the snake is wrapping around his chest and then coming up and over the shoulder. And then I'm going to have it drop down and join that other part of the body. Join that other part of the snake's body. So now, again, we go into a very foreshortened angle. Let's see here. Cassie Da Vinci's in the chat. How you doing, Cassie? Good to see you. Thanks for popping back in. Just working on some foreshortened snakes here. And now it's just a matter of having these two shapes unify. I'm just twisting this around so I can get a better angle. That's not quite right. See, what I'm trying to do here is I don't want it to run exactly parallel to the edge of his back. And it's tough to get a nice rhythmic flow to the snake while at the same time having that sense of foreshortening. Point being is that I want some foreshortening, and then I want the snake to flatten out and then come back up again. That is what I want to happen. Let's see here. Cassie asks, I see that you're doing this Greek mythological project, and it's been months. He says, did you write the story and now you're designing characters, or the inverse? Or are you still developing the ideas? Well, I'm still developing the ideas. I I've started designing the characters a little bit. These characters, as they stand right now, all of the Greek mythology, the Medusa pieces I've been doing, they are not actually going to be in the comic. This is something we were talking about a little bit earlier in the chat. They're not in the comic per se, even though the story I'm going to be doing is Greek mythology. And this is just something for me to draw that, I don't know, to keep my hands busy while I'm writing. In theory, I should be designing the characters, but there's so much that keeps changing about them as I'm working the story that I kind of want to wait until I start doing that publicly. But I will probably share some of the character design process as I get closer to when I get closer to the story being completely written, and then I'm ready to start drawing actual issues. That's probably when I'll share more of the character design process, because I want to try drawing a bunch of covers before I even start the series, just to see how well I can get those covers to embody the narrative that I'm going after. But generally, I know that you're asking just about these pieces in specific, but generally I do prefer to have everything written before I start working on the visual side of characters. It might be that I will do character design sketches just on the side. Like if there's certain details, I'm like, I want to make sure that I remember to do this in the actual comic, then I will make notes. But generally speaking, yeah, I prefer to have all of that done as its own, have all the writing done before I start really building the characters out. All right. So that one serpent seems to work for me. Although the only thing that bothers me is that he is twinning the serpent over on this side of the body. And I don't like that. Too much of repeating the exact same pose. I'm wondering about taking one of these serpents down here, and maybe having that up on the back of his neck. That might work. Let's see here. I just have this guy curling along his ear. Then kind of how I have it, that little sketch in the corner. Just a flat box kind of laying against the back of his neck. Let's see here. Cassie is reading some of the older parts of the chat. And he says, "What is cheeked up?" And he's talking about that was a reference to the butt cheeks of the male. His very strong glute muscles. Looks like he does a lot of squats. Which, by the way, that is yet another feature of the Art Pose Pro app that I use for the 3D reference on the side, is that there's a slider and you can change the body type from extremely muscular to extremely like emaciated. Or not emaciated, but you can make them much more, lean, thin versus really bulked up. The one thing it doesn't have, which would also, again, be kind of a wish list thing, would be that if you could tweak it so that instead of making someone muscular, you can make them just more heavy set, more of a rounded body. Just to have more variations of body types than just thin and strong. I mean, obviously this thing is meant for like manga and comic book artists. And those tend to be the figures that they're drawing, but I like to have as much variety of body types in my work as possible. Just trying to round out this serpent head. Yeah, I think that's okay. So I used something very similar to this in one of the previous versions, just the idea of the serpent wrapping around his body and neck like that. I think that's why I was a little bit hesitant to do it. But considering the fact that all of these are variations, or like a series of me exploring just the idea of Medusa, sleeping with her husband, lover, paramour, consort, whatever he is. That you know what, I shouldn't. I don't need to worry that much. Let me this way: I'm copying myself, so it's fine. Twinning, the shape of the serpents inside one piece may bother me, but repeating the overall themes and having the poses be similar across different pieces. Well, I say right now that shouldn't bother me, but who knows? I think there's many times before when I've said, this shouldn't bother me. This is fine. And then it drives me so nuts that I end up changing it. So we'll see. Let's see here. Cassie says, I don't understand some slang or something else because I'm from another country and still learning English. Your English and your comprehension of English is fantastic. I barely speak. My wife thinks I speak Spanish. I speak enough Spanish that I can communicate and get a hotel room and get food. But other than that, my Spanish is quite limited. Whereas she actually speaks, a few different languages. but not Spanish. So that must be the reason why she thinks so. The point being is that I admire anyone who's taking on learning English because it's a pain in the ass language. It's weird. Cassie says you will probably see me giving some simple questions or answers sometimes, but I want an opinion of you guys about my level of English. I think your level of English is excellent. So he said, I think there's an I think that I want is a little bit rude to say, but there's another way to say that. No, I think that the way that you're asking and the way that you're speaking is just fine. Much better than I would do with foreign languages, with other languages other than my native tongue. A little sleepy. All right, let me erase some of these extra diagrams along the side. I think this should be enough with the snakes. I actually need to rework these bodies so that they make a little bit more of a rhythm. One thing I want to do first is bump up the opacity and just see if I can give the figures a stronger outline. So that I can kind of work the silhouette of the entire piece better. This is something similar to, well, it's exactly something that my good friend Carl Altstetter taught me about inking. Where he said a lot of times professional comic book inkers will do what's called a holding line, which is really just a strong silhouette around the character, mainly to separate the characters from the background, the environment. Now that holding line will still have darker lines on the sides facing away from the light and lighter lines on the sides facing towards the light. But that strong outline, that strong silhouette, just helps to define the figures better in the whole piece. And I figured the snake thing is going to get a little bit messy. I'm going to be doing a bit of draw and erase as I'm trying to position them within the piece. And just giving a little bit of a better outline, I think will help with that drawing erasing process. But I don't want to get too caught up in making these like a really refined silhouettes, because I'm going to have to redo all of this when I do basically digital inking again. And it will be a chance to refine the outline of the figure. But my main reason right now is because I want to make sure that the silhouettes of the figures play nicely with the silhouettes of the snakes wrapped around them. Let's see here. Byron is giving Cassie some positive feedback on his English as well. So we just hit an hour here on the live stream. I'm going to finish this major outline, and then I'll just keep working on the snakes into next week. So I'll go here for a few more minutes. But if anyone has any final questions before we wrap it up today, now would be a good time to ask them. Yeah, maybe I need to stop fussing so much about painted work versus line work and just do the piece the way that I envision it. And then when I get to the end, do what I've done in the past, where I just take the line art itself and just color it, just make the line art do a color hold. So instead of being black, it matches the overall color key of the piece. Let's see here. How you doing, Frank? Salazar Art Nation asks, what is your favorite pen? And he also says, I need to learn to color hold. Well, two things, because I can tell you real quick, the color hold. First off, on the color hold, it's pretty straightforward. But my favorite pen, wow, that's tough. Because mostly when I ink with a brush these days. So I don't really use pens that often. I don't have a favorite pen anymore. I will tell you that my favorite brush is the Dick Blick Scholastic Wonder White. See, I think I might have some here next to me. So I have a few Raphael brushes. Hang on, I'm going to switch to the big camera. I've got some Raphael brushes, and I've got some Winsor & Newton Series 7 brushes. And I will tell you that the Winsor & Newton Series 7 come highly recommended. They come recommended from my good friend Trevor, who himself is a fantastic inker. I have an original of his that he inked, well, that he drew and inked, that's hanging on my wall. It looks fantastic. The Winsor & Newtons don't quite work for me. They just, maybe it's because I've been using the Dick Blick ones for so long that my style, my tastes have really settled on it. But mostly when I ink, I use they're called Wonder White rounds. So this is, let me flip that over. Hopefully that's showing forward on your screen. Yeah, this is a Dick Blick Wonder White round, and it's a number 2. What I tend to do is I have a number 2 for doing my outlines. I will use a 00 for detail work and for background, like small lines and backgrounds. And then I will use like a number 4, which I don't know where that number 4 is, but I'll use a number 4 for just overall larger stuff. To be honest, I've moved, instead of using the 00, I'll use a 0, a number 2, and a number 4. So I'll use the number 4 kind of for filling in blacks. And even that, you go bigger. You go like a 6 for filling in blacks. So I will use a 00, or I'll use a 0, a 2, and a 4. Those are the brushes I use. And the idea is I treat them like as if I'm using a repeatograph. Really skilled inkers can get like a number 4 or a number 6 brush, and they can just get all of the line lengths they need from thick to thin with just one brush. But I don't have that level of control and skill, so I just use the different brushes the way you would a repeatograph. You switch to your 0.5, and you're going to switch to your, like with these, your number 2s, your number 4s, that sort of thing. So I have favorite brushes instead of favorite pens. I will say that for just sketching and doodling, I use these are Pentel brush pens. Most people use them for watercolor, but what I do is I just fill them with fountain pen ink. And the reason why I use them with fountain pen ink is because if you use India ink that you use for making comics, it'll clog the brushes. It'll clog it and just it will become unusable. Whereas if you use a fountain pen ink, it will stay fluid in there over long periods of time. So you're just able to keep working and drawing and inking with that. So that is probably, those are my favorite brushes and my favorite brush pens. But in terms of actual just traditional pens, I don't really have a favorite pen anymore because I don't really, when I am drawing in ink, I'm either using a brush pen or, I don't know, just using a ballpoint pen or whatever's handy. Color holds. The fact of the matter is there's really, the easiest way to do a color hold is, for instance, all of this line art that I have here, if you have your inks on a separate layer, which, you know, when you're doing a comic, you should, you can just take that layer and there's two ways that I find to do a color hold. If your white area is transparent, meaning if you turn off your background, you don't see anything, like it's just the lines, then you can do in both Procreate and in Photoshop, you can do an alpha lock. So I'm going to duplicate this layer, turn that off, and with an alpha lock, if I wanted to start painting the line art blue, let me turn the opacity all the way up. What the alpha lock does, and this is for, I presume it would work in Krita and Clip Studio Paint the same way. But when you alpha lock a layer, what it means is that any layer that is transparent, you cannot paint on. All you can paint on is your colored layers. So you would just take a brush and move this up. I could just come in here and you see how like the forearm is turning blue? I'm just coloring this. I'm just changing the color by coloring on top of it. Now, you can't see my hand, but I'm not running my line like very carefully over this. I'm not tracing it. I'm just scribbling on top of it. So let's say I want his arm to be blue, but I want her to be green. I can come over and start coloring and just switch to green for her. And I can just go in and color the line art. And I'm not being specific. I'm just scribbling on there because it's not letting anything that's transparent get color. Now, the other way to do a color hold, let me delete that one. So if I turn this on, or actually, here's an easy way to do it. If I were to copy all, which is basically copy merge in Procreate, and then paste, what it has pasted in now is an image that it looks the same as what we were doing before, but it has a white background now. So there's a background in here, meaning that if I were to, even if I were to do an alpha lock, if I color on this, it's going to color over everything. It's not going to color over just your transparent layers. So again, what I'm about to show you, Frank, is something that will work in any digital program. If you were to just scan in your traditional comic pages into a scanner, or whether you were drawing digitally, and you had a layer, and your comic page is black and white, meaning that it's not black lines and transparent. It's like a solid white opaque background with ink on it. Like you just scanned a drawing. You can then take those, you can take the whole piece and you can do a hue saturation And let's colorize it. Let's say you decide to make it blue. So you can shift the whole thing to whatever color you want. But actually, let's undo that real quick. Let's say that you just want to make her blue. Then what you can do is, first off, you want to duplicate your layers so that you always have a copy of your original ink scanned in case you mess up and you have to undo this. But anyway, you can go in and say, all right, I'm going to make her green. You can come in and just use the selection tool and select around her. And now you can do, what was I going to do? Hue saturation. Now you can make her green. And then you can go in and select the guy. And I'm making really rough selections. I'm not trying to get it super exact and perfect. The difference being is that if you're doing this, you're probably going to be you just need to be concerned about the areas where the different colored elements overlap and make sure you've got a clean selection so that his hand ends right where her snakes are, that sort of thing. But anyway, then you just do the exact same process again. You do hue saturation. And let's say for him, you're going to make him kind of bluish. But maybe you're going to desaturate that blue a little bit. Now, the problem with hue saturation is that if you want to go to a darker color, if you darken it, because the whole thing is a solid color, like because there's white in between the black, if you go darker, then it darkens the whole thing. You don't want that. So it works better if you're just doing light colors. If you really wanted to do a color hold and make it a dark color, then you would have to go in and delete the white from in between your inks, which is, it's not a huge pain in the ass. It's just something that I don't bother doing. But you can desaturate and get something that's kind of like a bluer gray or gray blue, kind of like that. So, point being, Frank, is that's how you do a color hold. And you don't need to do it over the entire piece. Because you can see all of the snake heads are still, if I deselect there, you can see all of the snake heads that are around here are still the original red color of my sketch. So you can just, when you do a color hold, you can just pick certain areas. So you can leave most of your line art black or whatever color and just color certain areas. If there's an explosion, or if there's a lighting effect, if there's a lamp and you want to change it, or you just want the skin color of character. If they're wearing clothes, but you want the lines of their face and their arms, or if they're wearing shorts, their legs, if you want the exposed skin to have a different color than just black line art, that's how you do it. You just lasso the area you want and hue saturation or alpha lock and color it in. So that's how you do a color hold. I hope that is useful and helpful. So I think on that note, we're ready to wrap it up, guys. All right. Back to my big ugly mug. So again, if you'd like to get additional bonus live streams twice a month, on the first Tuesday and first Tuesday and third Tuesday of the month, we do what's called Art Book Study Group. And it is where we do like 2.5, 3-hour long live streams where we do deep dives into some of the best art books around. That right now we're doing a deep dive on Walt Reed's The Figure. You get access to that. You can get access to read all of my comic books online in a digital archive. You can get access to our Patreon exclusive Discord server where we share artwork, give each other feedback. There's additional rewards at higher tiers, but for as little as $2 a month, you get access to all of that at patreon.com/Jeremy. It's patreon.com/GERIMI. If you'd like to get a free digital sketchbook, work in progress animated GIFs delivered right to your inbox, blog posts about what I'm reading, what I'm watching, what's inspiring me creatively, you can sign up for my free monthly newsletter at newsletter.jeremy.net. And if you would like to purchase physical comic books, or if you read digitally on Comixology or Kindle, you can go to amazon.jeremy.net. You can pick up my first graphic novel, Eye of the Gods. It's a psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. My most recent project, Morning Star, it's Lucifer's Fall from Heaven, told as a Western. It's an 8-issue series. Volume 1 contains issues 1 through 4. Volume 2 contains issues 5 through 8. Both have extensive back matter, character sketches, character designs, script excerpts, photo reference to show you how to put my pages together. You get all those at amazon.jeremy.net. And there are book flip-throughs on the homepage of my YouTube page if you want to check that out. All the links mentioned here are in the descriptions of the video, except on Twitch, there's descriptions on my homepage. There's links there that will take you to all of these. So you can check all of that out there. Again, everybody, thank you for hanging out. Art Styles Donations is very useful. You're very happy to share whatever I know. I'm happy to pass on to other fellow creatives. Byron says, thanks for the stream. You know what? Thank you guys for showing up. You guys make it worth it. It's always fun to spend time with you guys at the drawing table. I thank you. I appreciate you. That's it for now. Go be creative.